My name is Emma, 24 years old, and my entire world nearly fell apart when my parents decided I was nothing but a financial burden. After years of subtle criticism and judgment, my father dropped the bomb during dinner. Starting next month, you'll pay rent if you want to keep living here. My mother just sat there nodding, as if they had discussed this for weeks behind my back. After promising me for years that they would support me while I built my career, my father manipulated every conversation to make me feel like I was taking advantage of them. This resulted in me questioning my own worth in our family. My parents thought I would quietly accept it like always, but this time they went too far. The consequences went far beyond what anyone could imagine. Before I continue my story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe for more family secrets nobody tells. I always felt like an afterthought in my family. Growing up, my parents made it clear through their actions, if not their words, that I was somehow less worthy of their attention. My sister Jessica was 3 years older, more outgoing, and according to my parents, more successful in every way. I was the quiet one, the responsible one who worked hard without making waves. My parents owned a modest home in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio. After high school, I decided to stay home while attending community college and working part-time at a local marketing firm. I was saving money, contributing to household expenses, and slowly building my career. It wasn't glamorous, but I was proud of my independence. Every Sunday dinner became an exercise in patience. My father would ask about my week in a tone that suggested he was merely going through the motions. "How's that little job of yours going?" he'd ask, emphasizing little, as if my position as a junior marketing associate was something to be embarrassed about. "It's going well," I replied that particular Sunday in April. "My boss asked me to take the lead on our newest client's social media campaign." My mother barely looked up from her plate. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Jessica got another promotion? She'll be managing her own team now." This was the routine. Any accomplishment of mine was immediately overshadowed by Jessica's latest triumph. Jessica, who lived in Chicago, Jessica, who worked for a prestigious firm, Jessica, who rarely called home except to share good news. "Speaking of Jessica," my father said, putting down his fork with purpose, "she's thinking of buying a condo downtown. She called yesterday asking for some advice on mortgage rates." My mother beamed. "Isn't that wonderful? Our girl, a property owner at 27. I nodded and forced a smile. I had learned long ago that expressing jealousy or hurt only led to lectures about my attitude problem and how I should be more like my sister. The conversation shifted to rising property values and investment opportunities, topics that always seemed to circle back to money. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were obsessed with appearances, with seeming successful in the eyes of their friends and neighbors. I noticed my father glancing at me throughout dinner, like he was working up to something. Finally, as my mother cleared the plates, he cleared his throat. "Emma, your mother and I have been talking," he began, using the tone that always preceded bad news. "You've been living here rent-free since you graduated high school. You're 24 now." My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going, but I remained silent. "Starting next month, we think it's only fair that you pay rent if you want to keep living here. $500 a month." I nearly choked. "500? Dad, I only make $15 an hour, and I'm part-time while I finish my degree." He waved away my concern. "That's the going rate for a room in this area. Actually, we're giving you a discount. Consider yourself lucky." "What? But I already buy groceries twice a month and pay the internet bill," I protested, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I'm saving for my own place." My mother returned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Honey, it's time you learned the real cost of living. We can't support you forever." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had paid for Jessica's entire college education at a private university. They had helped her with the down payment on her first car. Meanwhile, I worked through community college, taking longer to graduate because I couldn't afford full-time tuition. "I understand," I said finally, because arguing would only make things worse. $500 a month. My father nodded, satisfied. "Good. And we'll need a security deposit too. First and last month's rent." $1,000, just like that. Most of my savings would be gone in an instant. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled through apartment listings on my phone, even though I knew I couldn't afford to move out. Not yet, anyway. The cheapest studio apartment started at $800, plus utilities and internet. I would need roommates, but all my close friends had either moved away for work or were still living at home like me. As I set my alarm for the next morning, a text from Jessica lit up my screen. "Mom says you're finally paying rent. Welcome to adulthood, sis." "Took you long enough." I didn't respond. Of course, they had already told her, probably seconds after I'd left the table. In the silence of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by remnants of a life that suddenly felt temporary, I made a decision. I would not continue to be the family's afterthought. Something had to change. The next morning, I woke up with a hollow feeling in my chest. $500 a month meant I would have to pick up more hours at work, which would affect my studies. I was only 2 semesters away from finishing my degree, but at this rate, it might take longer. I got dressed quietly, choosing to leave before my parents woke up. The house was silent as I made myself a quick breakfast, the conversation from last night echoing in my mind. At work, I tried to focus on the social media campaign I was developing, but my thoughts kept drifting. During my lunch break, I called the only person I thought might understand. "Aunt Carol, it's Emma." My mother's sister had always been different from the rest of the family. She lived in Seattle, worked as a graphic designer, and had never married or had children. My parents often spoke about her lifestyle with thinly veiled disapproval, but she was the only adult who ever seemed genuinely interested in my life. "Emma, what a lovely surprise." "How are you, sweetheart?" I hesitated. Then the whole story came tumbling out. The rent demand, the years of comparison to Jessica, the feeling that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. Aunt Carol listened without interrupting, then sighed deeply. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. Your parents, well, they've always been very focused on certain measures of success. It was the same when your mom and I were growing up. I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I can't afford to move out, but staying feels like giving up somehow." "What if you did move out?" she asked carefully. "Not immediately, but if you had a plan." "I've been saving, but it's not enough for first and last month's rent plus security deposit on an apartment. And now they want $1,000 by the end of the month. Listen, Emma, I have a proposition for you. I've been thinking about expanding my business, opening a small branch office in Columbus. I could use someone with marketing skills, someone I trust." My heart started beating faster. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a possibility," she corrected gently. "It wouldn't be immediate. I'd need a few months to set things up. But if you're interested, we could work toward it. In the meantime, maybe I could help with a loan for your first apartment." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it." "And Emma? Don't tell your parents yet. Not until we have concrete plans." After hanging up, I returned to my desk with renewed energy. I finished the social media proposal and even stayed late to get ahead on other projects. My supervisor noticed. "Nice work today, Emma. The client's going to love these concepts." It was a small compliment, but it meant more than any half-hearted praise I'd received at home. That evening, I returned to find my parents watching television in the living room. My father looked up briefly. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge if you're hungry." "Thanks," I said, heading to the kitchen. I wasn't actually hungry, but I needed a moment to compose myself. As I microwaved a plate of food I didn't want, my mother came in to refill her water glass. "We've been thinking," she said, not looking at me directly, "about what we discussed last night. Your father and I decided you can pay $450 instead of $500, since you do help with groceries." She said it like she was offering me a tremendous gift, like I should be grateful for the $50 reduction. Thank you," I managed to say. "And we'll only need first month's rent as deposit, not first and last, but we'll need it by the 1st of next month." Still $450 I didn't have readily available, but I nodded. "I understand." Good girl, she said, patting my shoulder before returning to the living room. I ate mechanically at the kitchen table, alone. Through the doorway, I could hear my parents discussing Jessica's potential condo purchase. My father suggesting they might help her out a bit with the down payment. The contrast was so stark it was almost laughable. Jessica gets help buying a condo. I get a $50 discount on rent in my own home. That night, I created a spreadsheet of my finances. If I took all the extra shifts my manager had been offering, picked up weekend work at the coffee shop that was hiring, and cut out every non-essential expense, I might be able to save enough for my own place in 3 months. 3 months of double shifts and minimal sleep. 3 months of enduring subtle jabs and constant comparisons. 3 months of being treated like a tenant rather than a daughter. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Carol. Spoke with a commercial real estate agent in Columbus today. Things might move faster than expected. Call me tomorrow. I fell asleep with the phone clutched in my hand, dreaming of escape. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, classes, and silent dinners. I had taken on weekend shifts at Sunrise Cafe, working from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. Between that, my marketing job, and my classes, I barely had time to breathe, let alone think about my deteriorating relationship with my parents. I paid the first month's rent on time, placing a check on the kitchen counter with a brief note. My father deposited it without comment. We had settled into a strange new dynamic. I was now a tenant, not a daughter, and the emotional distance between us grew wider each day. My mother occasionally attempted normal conversation, asking about my classes or commenting on the weather, but these exchanges felt hollow, performative. My father barely spoke to me at all, except to ask if I would be using the washing machine or to remind me that the electric bill was higher this month. One Tuesday evening in May, I came home exhausted after a full day of work, followed by a 3-hour marketing class. The house was unusually quiet. In the kitchen, I found a note from my mother. Dinner with the Andersons. Leftovers in fridge. Don't wait up. The Andersons were family friends whose daughter had recently gotten engaged. No doubt my parents would spend the evening bragging about Jessica while conveniently failing to mention their other daughter who worked 2 jobs and still lived at home. With the house to myself, I decided to do something I'd been putting off, begin sorting through my belongings. Aunt Carol had called twice more, each time with more concrete plans. She had found office space in Columbus and was in the process of filing the necessary paperwork to expand her business. She'd also connected me with a friend of hers who was looking for a roommate, a woman named Tara who worked as a nurse. I hadn't committed to anything yet, but hope was slowly transforming into a plan, a real, viable plan. I started with my closet, creating piles: keep, donate, throw away. It was cathartic, sorting through years of accumulated possessions and deciding what was truly important to me. Old high school t-shirts, jeans that no longer fit, books I'd never read again, all went into the donation pile. As I worked, I found a shoebox pushed to the back of my closet shelf. Inside were childhood mementos, birthday cards, school awards, photographs. I sat on my bed and sifted through them, smiling at forgotten memories. There was a photo of me at 10 years old, proudly holding up a science fair certificate. My father stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, actually looking proud. Another showed me and Jessica as teenagers, arms around each other's shoulders at a family picnic before the competition between us had become so pronounced. At the bottom of the box was a card in my mother's handwriting, given to me when I graduated high school. "We are so proud of the young woman you've become," it read. "Your kindness and determination will take you far in life. We love you always." I read it twice, trying to reconcile these words with the parents who now treated me like a financial burden. What had changed? Had they ever really seen me? Or was I always just a disappointment waiting to happen? My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was Jessica. "Hey, little sister," she said when I answered. "Mom told me you've been working yourself to death lately." "2 jobs, huh?" Her tone was light, conversational, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Smugness, maybe, or pity. Just trying to save some money, I replied neutrally. Yeah, about that. Mom mentioned they're charging you rent now. Don't take it personally, okay? They're just trying to teach you responsibility. I bit back a sarcastic response. I'm plenty responsible, Jess. Of course you are, she said quickly. I just mean, well, you know how they are. They want what's best for you. Do they? The question slipped out before I could stop it. There was a pause on the line. What's that supposed to mean? I sighed, suddenly tired of pretending. They paid for your entire education. They helped you buy your car. They're talking about helping with your condo down payment. Meanwhile, I'm working 2 jobs to pay them rent while trying to finish a degree I'm paying for myself. Jessica was quiet for a moment. That's different, she finally said. I was going to a university. You chose community college. I didn't choose it, Jess. It was all I could afford. Well, maybe if you'd applied for more scholarships? Stop, I interrupted. Just stop. You have no idea what it's been like here since you left. Everything I do is compared to you, and I always come up short. That's not fair, Emma. I can't help it if… If what? If you're their favorite? If they've decided I'm not worth investing in? If they've always treated us differently? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. I didn't call to fight, Jessica finally said, her voice tight. I just wanted to check on you. I'm fine, I lied. I have to go. I have an early shift tomorrow. After hanging up, I looked down at the childhood mementos scattered across my bed. With sudden determination, I gathered them up and returned them to the shoebox. These belonged to a different Emma, one who still believed her parents saw her value. That night, I emailed Aunt Carol. I'm ready to make a change. Let's talk about Columbus. June arrived with unexpected heat and a sense of building tension in the house. I had been carefully avoiding my parents, working extra shifts and spending my free time at the library or coffee shops. When we did interact, conversation was minimal and strained. I had secretly spoken with Tara, Aunt Carol's friend in Columbus, and we had agreed to meet in person the following weekend. If all went well, I would move in with her at the beginning of July. Aunt Carol had also offered me a part-time position at her new branch office, with the potential for full-time work after I completed my degree in December. Everything was falling into place, but I hadn't told my parents any of it. Part of me wanted to surprise them, to simply announce one day that I was leaving. Another part, the part that still yearned for their approval, hoped they might try to convince me to stay. One evening, I arrived home to find my father waiting for me in the kitchen. His expression was serious, bordering on angry. Sit down, Emma, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We need to talk. My stomach tightened as I took a seat. Had he somehow discovered my plans? Your mother found this while doing laundry, he said, pushing a piece of paper toward me. It was a pay stub from the cafe, showing my weekend hours and tips. You've been working a second job, he stated flatly. I nodded, unsure why this warranted a confrontation. Yes, at Sunrise Cafe on weekends. And you didn't think to tell us? I didn't realize I needed to report my employment status to you, I said carefully. His face hardened. Don't get smart with me. If you're making additional income, your rent should reflect that. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. You want to raise my rent because I'm working more hours? We agreed on $450 based on your previous income. Now that you're making more, I'm working 60 hours a week between 2 jobs and trying to finish my degree, I interrupted, anger finally breaking through my usual restraint. I'm saving for my own place. That's why I took the second job. Your own place? He looked genuinely surprised, as if the idea that I might want independence had never occurred to him. There's no need for that. You can stay here as long as you need to. As long as I pay rent, you mean. That's how the real world works, Emma. No one gets a free ride. Except Jessica, I thought, but didn't say. My mother entered the kitchen, sensing the tension. What's going on? Emma has been working at a cafe without telling us, my father explained. And apparently she's planning to move out. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to something like hurt. Move out? But why? Where would you go? I hadn't planned to have this conversation yet, but there was no avoiding it now. I've been offered a job opportunity in Columbus. I'd be working for Aunt Carol at her new branch office. Carol? My sister Carol? My mother's voice rose. She offered you a job without discussing it with us first? I'm 24 years old, Mom. She doesn't need your permission to hire me. This is ridiculous, my father declared. You have a job here. Your life is here. A job where I'm underemployed and underpaid, I countered. A life where I work constantly just to give half my income to my parents. My mother pressed her lips together. You make it sound like we're taking advantage of you. We're teaching you responsibility. By charging me rent while helping Jessica buy a condo? The words burst out before I could stop them. Both of my parents went still. So that's what this is about, my father said slowly. You're jealous of your sister. This isn't about jealousy, I insisted. It's about fairness. It's about being treated like a burden in my own family. You've always had a chip on your shoulder about Jessica, my mother said, shaking her head. We've given you both what you needed. That's not true, and you know it, I said quietly. You've always favored her. Always. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I won't sit here and be accused of playing favorites by my own daughter. The fact is, Jessica applied herself. She went to a good school, got a good job, and made something of herself. She didn't settle for the easy route. Each word felt like a physical blow. The easy route, working 2 jobs while pursuing a degree, living with constant criticism and comparison. I think I need some air, I said, standing up and heading for the door. We're not finished discussing this, my father called after me. But I was already out the door, walking quickly down the street, tears burning in my eyes. In my pocket, my phone buzzed repeatedly, probably my mother calling, but I ignored it. I walked for nearly an hour, letting the early summer evening air clear my head. By the time I returned home, the house was dark, except for a light in the living room. I entered quietly, hoping to avoid another confrontation. My father was alone, watching television with the volume low. He glanced up as I passed the doorway, but said nothing. I continued to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother, and a text. We only want what's best for you. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and composed an email to Tara. Looking forward to meeting you this weekend. I'm definitely interested in the room starting July 1st. Then I began making a more detailed inventory of my belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. The decision had been made, the truth spoken aloud. There was no going back now, only forward into a future I would shape for myself. The meeting with Tara went better than I could have hoped. She was a practical, good-humored woman in her early 30s who worked night shifts at Ohio State University Medical Center. The apartment was a spacious 2-bedroom in a converted Victorian house with high ceilings and large windows. My share of the rent would be $650, more than I was paying my parents, but still within my budget if I kept the weekend cafe job until I transitioned to full-time at Aunt Carol's office. The timing works perfectly for me, Tara explained as she showed me around. My previous roommate left to move in with her boyfriend, and I've been covering the full rent for 2 months. July 1st would be ideal. We discussed house rules, minimal but reasonable, shared spaces, and the neighborhood. By the end of our meeting, I had signed a 6-month lease agreement and handed over a check for the security deposit. Money I had been carefully saving from my cafe tips, hidden away where my parents couldn't find it. The drive back home was surreal. In 2 weeks, I would be living in a different city, working a new job, starting a completely new chapter of my life. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had told my parents I was visiting a college friend for the day, and they hadn't questioned it. Our interactions since the argument had been coldly polite, with minimal conversation beyond necessary household coordination. I knew I needed to tell them about my definite plans to move, but I was waiting for the right moment. Or perhaps just delaying the inevitable confrontation. The opportunity came sooner than expected. When I arrived home, My parents were hosting an impromptu dinner for the neighbors, the Wilsons and their son Keith, who had recently returned from his first year of medical school. "Emma," my mother called as I tried to slip upstairs unnoticed. "Come join us. You remember Keith, don't you? He's just finished his first year at Johns Hopkins." Keith had been 2 years ahead of me in high school, handsome, popular, and completely unaware of my existence. Now he smiled politely as my mother practically pushed me into the dining room. "Of course. Nice to see you again, Emma." "You too," I murmured, taking the only empty seat directly across from him. My father was already deep in conversation with Mr. Wilson about Keith's promising medical career, while my mother hovered at the edge of the table, serving more wine and beaming with vicarious pride. "And he's already been offered a research position for the summer," Mrs. Wilson was saying. "The professor specifically requested him." "Wonderful," my mother exclaimed. "You must be so proud." "We certainly are," Mr. Wilson agreed, clapping his son on the shoulder. "All those years of pushing him to excel are finally paying off." My father nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I always tell our girls. You have to push yourself if you want to succeed. No one's going to hand you opportunities." Keith glanced at me uncomfortably, clearly sensing the subtext. "Emma's doing well too," my mother added hastily. "She's working in marketing now." "Intern?" Mrs. Wilson asked sympathetically. "Junior associate," I corrected, forcing a smile. "And still finishing her degree," my father added, as if explaining why I hadn't achieved more. "Community college, right?" Mrs. Wilson said, her tone making it clear this was vastly inferior to her son's prestigious medical school. I took a large sip of wine. "Yes, but actually, I've recently accepted a new position in Columbus. I'll be moving at the end of the month." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at me, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. "A new position?" my father finally managed. "This is the first we're hearing of it." I met his gaze steadily. "I was going to tell you tonight. I'll be working for Aunt Carol at her new branch office. I've already found an apartment with a roommate." Mrs. Wilson, sensing the tension, attempted to smooth things over. "Well, that sounds exciting. Columbus is a lovely city. Keith almost did his undergraduate studies at Ohio State. But he chose Yale instead," Mr. Wilson added quickly. My mother stood abruptly. "I'll get dessert. Emma, would you help me in the kitchen?" I followed her, knowing what was coming. As soon as the kitchen door swung shut behind us, she turned on me. "How could you blindside us like this? In front of the Wilsons, of all people." "I'm sorry about the timing," I said quietly. "But I've made my decision. Without discussing it with us? Without even giving us a chance to— To what, Mom? Talk me out of it? Remind me how much better Jessica is doing? Increase my rent again?" She flinched. "That's not fair." "None of this has been fair," I replied. "But it's happening. I'm moving to Columbus on July 1st. My mother stared at me for a long moment, then silently began cutting the apple pie she'd made for dessert. I stood awkwardly, waiting for her to say something more, but she remained focused on her task. Finally, I took the dessert plates from the cabinet and began setting them out on a tray. "Jessica never would have done this to us," my mother said softly, almost to herself. I paused, the familiar pain of comparison washing over me. "No, she wouldn't have. Because you never would have charged her rent or made her feel like a burden." My mother's hands stilled on the pie server. "Is that really how you feel? Like a burden?" For once, her question seemed genuine, without the defensive edge I'd grown accustomed to. "Yes," I admitted. "For years now." She opened her mouth as if to say more, but my father appeared in the doorway. "The Wilsons are waiting," he said tersely. "What's taking so long?" My mother quickly finished plating the dessert, the moment of potential understanding lost. I helped carry everything back to the dining room, where the conversation had shifted to Keith's plans to specialize in cardiology. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and subtle digs. My parents managed to maintain their composure in front of the guests, but I could feel their anger simmering beneath the surface. As soon as the Wilsons left, the real confrontation would begin. But when the front door finally closed behind our neighbors, My father simply turned to me and said, "We'll discuss this tomorrow. I'm too tired for another argument tonight." He went upstairs without another word. My mother lingered in the hallway, looking lost and somehow older than she had just hours earlier. "Mom," I began, not sure what I wanted to say. She shook her head. "Not now, Emma. Just, not now." I watched her follow my father upstairs, then began clearing the dining room table alone. As I loaded the dishwasher, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The truth was out now. In 2 weeks, I would be gone. Whether they understood my reasons or not, I was finally taking control of my own life. The next 2 weeks were a study in uncomfortable silence. My parents had indeed discussed my decision with me the morning after the dinner party, but it was less a discussion than a series of accusations and guilt trips. "After everything we've done for you," my father had said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "This is how you repay us? By running away?" "I'm not running away," I'd insisted. "I'm pursuing a better opportunity." "With your aunt," my mother had added bitterly. "My own sister, going behind our backs." I'd tried to explain that Aunt Carol hadn't gone behind anyone's back, that this was a legitimate business decision on her part and a career opportunity for me, but they refused to listen. In their minds, I was being ungrateful and rebellious, and Aunt Carol was enabling me. After that conversation, we settled into an icy coexistence. My parents spoke to me only when necessary, and I spent as much time as possible away from the house. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, arranged to take my final exams early, and began secretly packing my belongings when they weren't home. Jessica called twice during this period. The first time, she seemed genuinely concerned. "Mom sounds really upset," she said cautiously. "Are you sure this move is a good idea?" "I'm sure," I replied, sitting on the floor of my bedroom surrounded by half-filled boxes. "It's the right decision for me." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "They say you didn't even discuss it with them first. Would it have made a difference if I had?" I asked. "They made it clear what they think of my choices. They've always made it clear." "That's not fair, Emma. They've supported you." "No, Jessica, they've supported you. I've been on my own since high school." She sighed heavily. "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this. I just think you're being a bit dramatic. Parents are supposed to push their kids to succeed. There's a difference between pushing and comparing, between encouraging and criticizing. You wouldn't understand because you've never been on the receiving end." "Maybe because I didn't have such a massive chip on my shoulder," she snapped. "Did you ever think that might be why they treat us differently?" The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Jessica telling me I needed to grow up, and me hanging up in frustration. Her second call, a week later, was shorter and more direct. "Mom says you're still planning to move next week." "Yes," I confirmed, adding nothing more. "I think you're making a mistake," she said flatly, "but it's your life to ruin." After that, I blocked her number. I didn't need more negativity as I prepared for the biggest change of my life. The day before my planned move, I came home from my final shift at the cafe to find my mother sitting alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Your father's at the hardware store," she said, answering the question I hadn't asked. I nodded and moved to go upstairs, but she spoke again, stopping me. "I found the boxes in your room," she said quietly, "when I was changing the sheets." I hadn't told them I was leaving the next day. I'd planned to say goodbye in the morning, hoping to avoid a prolonged emotional scene. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what exactly I was apologizing for. "I was going to tell you tonight." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "You've already paid rent for the entire month." It wasn't what I expected her to say. "Yes, I didn't want to leave you short." "Very responsible," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, looking up at me directly, "Why didn't you ever tell us how you felt? About the comparisons to Jessica, about feeling like a burden?" The question caught me off guard. "I tried, Mom. Many times. You and Dad never listened." "We listen," she protested weakly. "No, you hear. but you don't listen. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if the answers were hidden in its depths. "We only wanted what was best for you." It was the same phrase she had texted me after our argument, and it still rang hollow. What was best for me, or what looked best to the neighbors, to the Wilsons, to your friends at church? Her cheeks flushed slightly. "That's not fair." "None of this has been fair, Mom. That's the whole point." We sat in silence for several minutes, the ticking of the kitchen clock suddenly loud in the quiet house. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're in debt, you know." "Quite a bit of debt." I stared at her, confused by the sudden change of topic. "What?" "Your father lost his job 5 years ago. He was unemployed for 8 months before finding his current position, and it pays less than he made before. We took out a second mortgage to help Jessica with her college tuition. We've been struggling ever since." I tried to process this information. "But you never said anything. You kept helping Jessica with money for her car, for her condo." "We wanted her to finish what she started," my mother said defensively. "She was at a prestigious university. We couldn't just pull her out because of our financial problems." "So instead, you started charging me rent," I said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You needed the money." She looked away, but not before I saw the truth in her eyes. "The rent wasn't just about teaching you responsibility." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd believed they favored Jessica because they thought she was more worthy, more successful. But the truth was more complicated, and in some ways, more painful. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I would have helped if I'd known." "Your father wouldn't allow it," she said, still not meeting my eyes. "He was too proud. He didn't want either of you girls to know how bad things had gotten. So instead, he made me feel worthless. Like I wasn't good enough to deserve the same support Jessica got." My mother winced. "That wasn't the intention, but it was the result," I said quietly. "For years, I've believed that you both thought less of me because I wasn't like Jessica." "We've always been proud of you, Emma," she insisted. But the words sounded hollow after everything that had happened. "Not enough to treat me with the same respect you give her," I replied. "Not enough to be honest with me." The front door opened and closed, signaling my father's return. My mother straightened, her momentary vulnerability vanishing. "Please don't mention this conversation to your father. He wouldn't want you to know." Of course he wouldn't. Heaven forbid anyone acknowledge the truth in this family. I stood up. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. My friend is coming with a truck at 9. My mother nodded stiffly. "Will you at least stay for dinner tonight?" "I have plans," I lied, unable to face another tense family meal. "I should finish packing." I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door, leaning against it as the implications of what I'd learned sank in. My parents hadn't just favored Jessica. They had financially sacrificed for her while using me as a source of income. The rent, the sudden concern about my additional income when they found my cafe pay stub, it all made sense now. I wondered if Jessica knew about their financial situation. Had she continued accepting their help despite knowing they were struggling? Or was she as much in the dark as I had been? Either way, it didn't change my decision to leave. If anything, it confirmed I was making the right choice. I couldn't continue to be the solution to my parents' financial problems, especially when they couldn't even be honest with me about it. That night, I left the house quietly while my parents were having dinner, leaving a note that simply said I was meeting friends to say goodbye and would be back late. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel near my apartment in Columbus. I couldn't bear to spend one more night in that house, knowing what I now knew. The next morning, I returned at exactly 9 o'clock. Tara was already waiting in her pickup truck, ready to help me move. My parents stood awkwardly in the doorway as we loaded the few boxes containing everything I wanted to take with me. "You're not taking your dresser?" my mother asked, watching as I carried out the last box of clothes. "I don't need it," I replied. "Tara's place is already furnished." My father had barely spoken, his expression a mixture of anger and what might have been regret. As I prepared to leave, he finally stepped forward. "This is a mistake, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Running away won't solve anything." "I'm not running away," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "I'm moving forward." He shook his head. "You'll be back. When things get tough, you'll realize how good you had it here." Even now, he couldn't see the truth, or refuse to acknowledge it. My mother hugged me stiffly, pressing an envelope into my hand. "A little something to help with your new place," she whispered. I almost refused it, but something in her expression stopped me. This was her way of acknowledging what she couldn't say aloud. And then it was over. I climbed into Tara's truck, and we drove away from the house I'd grown up in, the parents who had never really seen me, and the life that had become increasingly unbearable. As we hit the highway, Tara glanced at me. "You okay?" I opened the envelope my mother had given me. Inside was a check for $500, exactly the amount I'd paid in rent, and a short note. "We love you. Please call when you're settled." "I will be," I answered, folding the note and tucking it into my pocket. "I will be." Columbus became my sanctuary. The apartment I shared with Tara quickly felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. My room was small but bright, with a window overlooking a tree-lined street. I decorated it simply. New bedding, a few plants, framed prints I found at a thrift store, creating a space that was entirely my own. Aunt Carol's business occupied the ground floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The office was modern and stylish, reflecting her design sensibilities. On my first day, she gave me a tour, introduced me to the small staff she'd already hired, and showed me to my desk. A real desk, not tucked in a corner or shared with interns, but a proper workspace with my name on a small plaque. "I know you're still finishing your degree," she said, "so we'll start you part-time. 25 hours a week, flexible schedule. Once you graduate in December, we can discuss full-time options." The salary she offered was nearly double what I'd been making at my previous job, even for part-time hours. For the first time, I felt valued for my skills and potential, not judged for what I lacked. I continued working weekend shifts at a cafe near our apartment, similar to Sunrise back home, but with better tips and a more supportive manager. Between the two jobs, I was making enough to cover my expenses and even start a small savings account. My parents and I settled into a pattern of stilted weekly phone calls. My mother would ask about my job and apartment, provide updates on neighbors and distant relatives, and carefully avoid any mention of our last conversation about their financial situation. My father would briefly come on the line at the end, asking perfunctory questions about my work before handing the phone back to my mother. Jessica remained silent for nearly 2 months after I blocked her number. Then, in late August, she sent an email. "Emma, I've been thinking about our last conversation. Mom finally told me about their financial struggles and how they've been charging you rent. I had no idea. I always assumed they were helping you the same way they helped me. I'm sorry for not seeing what was happening. I should have paid more attention, asked more questions. Maybe then I would have understood why you felt so differently about our parents than I did. I still think leaving the way you did was dramatic, but I understand it better now. Mom says you're doing well in Columbus. I'm glad. I'm closing on my condo next week. I've decided to refuse their offer to help with the down payment. They can't afford it, and I make enough to handle it myself. Anyway, I just wanted to clear the air. Call me if you want to talk. Jessica." I read the email 3 times, torn between lingering resentment and a desire for reconciliation. In the end, I replied with a brief but civil message, thanking her for reaching out and expressing hope that we could eventually rebuild our relationship. I didn't call, but I unblocked her number, a small step toward potential healing. As summer turned to fall, I settled into my new life. I made friends, real friends, not just work acquaintances, through Tara and her circle of fellow nurses. I joined a book club that met at a local coffee shop every other Thursday. I even started dating a graphic designer named Ryan who worked in the studio across the hall from Aunt Carol's office. Life wasn't perfect. I still struggled with insecurities born from years of comparison and criticism. I worked too much, slept too little, and sometimes found myself anticipating criticism that never came. But I was happy, genuinely, consistently happy, in a way I hadn't been for years. In October, 3 months after my move, my parents invited me home for dinner. "Just to catch up," my mother said during our weekly call. "We miss you." I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to return to the house that held so many painful memories. "Your father misses you too," she added, correctly interpreting my silence. "He'd never say it, but he does." "Okay," I agreed finally. "How about next Saturday?" The week leading up to the dinner, I vacillated between anxiety and a strange sense of confidence. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval. I was Emma, marketing associate at Carol Reed Design, college senior with a 3.8 GPA, independent adult with her own apartment and circle of friends. When Saturday arrived, I dressed carefully in clothes I'd bought with my own money. Dark jeans, a soft blue sweater, ankle boots. Professional, but casual. Adult, but approachable. I drove to my parents' house in the used Toyota I'd purchased the previous month, another symbol of my new independence. The house looked exactly the same, which seemed wrong somehow. In my mind, everything had changed, so the physical sameness of my childhood home felt discordant, like walking onto a familiar stage set for an entirely different play. My mother answered the door, her smile tight with nervousness. "Emma, you look wonderful. Come in, dinner's almost ready." My father was in the living room, standing awkwardly as if unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. He settled for a nod and a gruff, "You look well." "Thanks, Dad. So do you." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. "I made your favorite," my mother called from the kitchen. "Chicken parmesan." I followed her voice, noting the familiar details of the house, the faded wallpaper in the hallway, the collection of family photos, heavily featuring Jessica, on the wall, the slight squeak of the kitchen door. Dinner was a careful dance of safe topics. They asked about my job, my apartment, my classes. I inquired about their health, the neighbors, my father's work. We avoided any mention of rent, finances, or the circumstances of my departure. It wasn't until dessert, apple pie, also supposedly my favorite, though I'd always preferred chocolate cake, that my father cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began, his voice formal. "We may have been harsh with you before you left." Coming from him, this was practically an apology. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "We want you to know that your old room is always there if you need it," he added, missing the point entirely. "No rent required." I set down my fork. "I appreciate that, Dad, but I'm happy in Columbus. I have a good job, friends, my own place." "Of course," my mother interjected quickly. "We're just saying the option is there, if you ever want to come back." I smiled politely. "Thank you." We lapsed into silence again, the weight of unspoken truths heavy in the air. I thought about pressing the issue, about demanding a real conversation about favoritism and financial deception, but what would be the point? They weren't ready to acknowledge those deeper issues, and I no longer needed them to validate my experiences. As I prepared to leave, my mother handed me a container of leftovers and hugged me tightly. "We are proud of you, Emma," she whispered. "Even if we don't always show it properly." I hugged her back, surprised by the sudden lump in my throat. "I know, Mom." My father awkwardly patted my shoulder. "Drive safely." In the driveway, I paused to look back at the house, at my parents standing in the doorway, waving like a normal Rockwell painting of family contentment. It was a facade, of course, covering years of complicated dynamics and unresolved pain. But for the first time, I felt like I could see it clearly, without the desperate need for their approval clouding my vision. As I drove away, I realized that I had gotten what I came for, though it wasn't what I'd expected. Not a dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but something quieter and more profound. The knowledge that I had changed, even if they hadn't. I was no longer defined by their expectations or limited by their perceptions. I had built a life of my own, and it was good. It was enough. It was more than enough. Winter arrived early in Columbus, bringing swirling snow and holiday decorations before Thanksgiving had even passed. I graduated in December, walking across the stage to receive my diploma, while Aunt Carol, Tara, and Ryan cheered from the audience. My parents had been invited, but declined, citing the weather and the distance. Jessica sent flowers and a card signed, "Proud of you, sis." Aunt Carol officially hired me full-time as a marketing manager, with a salary that made me feel valued, and a benefits package that included health insurance and a 401k. I moved to a one-bedroom apartment closer to downtown, a small but stylish space that I decorated exactly as I wanted, with no one's approval to seek but my own. My relationship with Ryan deepened, though we took things slowly, both wary of past hurts. He had his own complicated family history, parents who divorced bitterly when he was 12, leaving him to navigate divided loyalties and separate holidays. We understood each other's scars without needing to explain them. The holidays approached with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I hadn't been home since that awkward dinner in October, though I'd maintained the weekly phone calls with my mother. Each call ended with the same question: "Will you come home for Christmas?" I hesitated each time, until finally, in mid-December, I agreed. "Just for Christmas Eve and morning," I specified. "I'll drive down after work on the 23rd and leave on the afternoon of the 25th. "That's wonderful," my mother said, genuine relief in her voice. "Jessica will be here too. It'll be just like old times." I doubted that very much, but I kept the thought to myself. The drive to my parents' house on December 23rd was tense, my car filled with carefully wrapped presents, and my mind filled with memories of holidays past, the subtle competition, the inevitable comparisons, the way Jessica's gifts were always slightly more expensive, more thoughtfully chosen. To my surprise, Jessica's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. She met me at the door, her expression a mixture of wariness and hope. "Hey, little sister," she said, the old nickname less grating than it once had been. "Need help with your bags?" We carried my things inside together, making small talk about the weather and traffic. My parents greeted me with cautious enthusiasm, as if unsure how to act around this new independent version of their younger daughter. Dinner that night was surprisingly pleasant. Jessica spoke about her new condo and her job, but without the smugness I'd come to expect. My parents asked about my work at Aunt Carol's firm with what seemed like genuine interest. I showed them photos of my new apartment on my phone, and my mother actually complimented my decorating choices. After dinner, Jessica and I volunteered to do the dishes together, something that had never happened in our childhood. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, she spoke quietly, away from our parents' ears. "I'm sorry, Emma, for a lot of things." I glanced at her, surprised by the direct apology. "Like what?" She sighed, focusing on the plate she was drying. "For not seeing how differently they treated us. For accepting their help without questioning where the money was coming from. For acting superior when I had advantages you didn't." I was silent for a moment, processing her words. "Thank you for saying that. I've been thinking a lot since you left," she continued. "About our family dynamics, about how I contributed to them. I was so focused on meeting their expectations that I never stopped to question whether those expectations were fair to you. It wasn't entirely your fault," I admitted. "You didn't create the situation." "No, but I benefited from it, and I never stood up for you." We finished the dishes in thoughtful silence. As we rejoined our parents in the living room, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Not a complete healing, but the beginning of something new. Christmas Eve passed in a blur of traditions. Church service, hot chocolate, one present opened before bed. Christmas morning brought the usual exchange of gifts, though I noticed my parents had made an effort to be equitable this year. The presents they gave me were thoughtful and of similar value to Jessica's, a stark change from previous years. After lunch, as I prepared to leave, my father called me into his study, a room I'd rarely entered as a child, as it had been his private domain. "I have something for you," he said, closing the door behind us. "Something extra." He opened his desk drawer and removed an envelope, handing it to me without meeting my eyes. Inside was a check for $400, exactly the amount I had paid in rent during the 9 months before I moved out. Dad, It's yours, he interrupted. It always was. We had no right to take it from you. I stared at the check, then at my father, who looked older and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. Your mother told you about our financial problems, he said. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded. I was too proud to admit we were struggling, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. Too proud to tell you girls that I'd lost my job, that we'd mortgaged our future to pay for Jessica's education. Instead, I turned you into a solution. You could have just asked for help, I said softly. I would have given it freely. I know that now. He finally looked at me directly. I'm sorry, Emma, for making you feel less valued, less loved. That was never true. The apology I had longed for, delivered simply and directly when I least expected it. I felt tears rising but held them back. I don't need the money, I said, trying to return the check. I'm doing well now. He shook his head firmly. Take it. Use it for a vacation or save it for the future. Consider it back pay for all the times we failed to invest in you the way we should have. I tucked the check into my pocket. Thank you. He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional exchange. Your mother worries about you, you know. Living so far away. Columbus is only 2 hours from here, Dad. Still, he cleared his throat. We miss you. Coming from him, those 3 words meant more than 1,000 from someone else. I miss you too sometimes, I admitted, but I needed to build my own life, away from here. I understand that now. He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. Don't be a stranger, okay? As we left his study, I saw my mother and Jessica waiting in the hallway, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. My father nodded to them reassuringly and retreated to the living room. Everything okay? My mother asked. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. Everything's fine. I hugged them both goodbye, promising to call when I reached Columbus. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the 3 figures standing in the doorway. My family, flawed and complicated and slowly, tentatively trying to change. The road ahead stretched before me, leading back to my new life. My apartment, my job, Ryan waiting to hear about my holiday. I felt lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of resentment I'd carried for so long. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents and Jessica. Healing would take time, and some wounds might never fully close. But for the first time, I believed that healing was possible. Not a return to the past, but the creation of something new and healthier. As I merged onto the highway, heading north toward Columbus, I turned up the radio and smiled. I was Emma, 24 years old, and I was finally writing my own story. Not as the afterthought, the burden, or the solution to someone else's problems, but as the protagonist of my own life. And that story was just beginning.